Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
A quiet beginning. Have you ever smiled at your family while secretly wondering if they would be happier without you? If that question has ever crossed your mind, stay with me until the end of the story because a few years ago, I asked myself the same painful question. My name is Daniel, and this is not just another slow English reading story. This is the story of how I almost lost my wife, my children, and the peaceful life we had built together in the United States. It happened so slowly that I didn't even notice it at first. Sometimes, the biggest disasters don't begin with loud arguments or dramatic moments. Sometimes they begin with silence. Today, you will hear simple English, clear pronunciation, and a true-to-life story that can help you improve your listening, reading, and speaking skills naturally while following one emotional journey from beginning to end. So relax, breathe slowly, and listen carefully because every sentence matters. Maybe you will discover something about your own life while you improve your English. I used to believe that moving to America would solve everything. Better jobs, better schools, better opportunities, better dreams. Everyone around me said the same thing. Work hard now, enjoy life later. It sounded reasonable. It sounded responsible. It even sounded like love. So, I worked longer hours. I accepted extra shifts. I answered emails during dinner. I checked my phone before saying good morning to my wife. I told myself I was doing all of this for my family. Maybe you've heard that sentence before. Maybe you've even said it yourself. Every morning I left home before sunrise. The streets were quiet. The coffee shops were just opening. Cold winter mornings in Colorado felt very different from the warm climate where I grew up. Snow covered the sidewalks while I rushed toward another busy day. At first, everything felt exciting. New culture, new neighbors, new opportunities. But excitement slowly became routine, and routine quietly became distance. One evening, I came home later than usual. My house was completely silent. The toys were still on the living room floor. The television was off. The kitchen light was the only light still on. My wife was sitting alone at the table with a cup of tea that had already gone cold. She looked at me, smiled politely, and said only 3 words. "You're home late." Nothing more.
No anger, no shouting, no tears.
Just 3 calm words. Somehow, they hurt much more than an argument. Scientists often explain that healthy relationships depend less on grand romantic gestures and more on small daily moments of emotional connection. Psychologists sometimes call these tiny interactions emotional bids. A smile, a question, a simple conversation after work. When those moments are ignored again and again, emotional distance quietly grows, even when 2 people still live under the same roof.
I didn't know any of this then.
I simply believed that paying the bills was enough. Looking back now, I realize I was slowly becoming a visitor inside my own home. My children knew my voice, but they knew my schedule even better. My wife knew my dreams, but she no longer knew my thoughts. And perhaps the saddest part was this. I didn't notice anything was wrong, because nothing exploded. Everything simply became quieter. If you're learning English today, remember this simple sentence. Love grows through small moments. Say it slowly with me. Love grows through small moments. It is an easy sentence, but it carries one of the biggest lessons I have ever learned. That night, I believed tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, I would spend more time with my family. Tomorrow, I would listen more carefully. Tomorrow, I would finally slow down. But tomorrow has a strange habit. It keeps moving one day farther away. I had no idea that only a few weeks later, one unexpected moment would force me to ask the hardest question of my life. Was I providing for my family? Or was I slowly losing them? A new life in America. People often imagine that moving to the United States feels like stepping into a movie. Bright city lights, friendly neighbors, endless opportunities, bigger houses, better careers. I believed every bit of it. The day my family landed in America, I remember looking out of the airport window and whispering to myself, "This is where our new life begins." In many ways, I was right. Our new life did begin there. What I did not realize was that every new beginning quietly asks you to leave something behind. During our first autumn, everything fascinated me. The roads were wider than I had ever seen. Grocery stores seemed endless. Even choosing breakfast cereal became a 10-minute decision because there were hundreds of boxes on the shelves. My children laughed every time they heard a different American accent at school. They quickly learned new words, new games, and new habits. Sometimes they corrected my pronunciation with huge smiles on their faces, and instead of feeling embarrassed, I laughed with them. I repeated simple sentences every evening. How was your day? I'm proud of you. See you tomorrow. Those little English phrases slowly became part of our family life. If you're learning English with me today, repeat this sentence slowly. Every small step matters. It sounds simple, but those words carried me through many difficult days. Then winter arrived, and America showed me another side of itself. Snow covered our neighborhood for weeks. The mornings were dark and freezing. I had never experienced such long, cold seasons before. My wife loved watching snowflakes fall outside the window, but I mostly worried about driving safely to work before sunrise. The beauty of winter slowly turned into another reminder that life here demanded constant adjustment. Every season seemed to teach us a different lesson. Spring brought hope. Summer brought long workdays. Autumn reminded us that change never stopped. Winter tested our patience. Cultural differences surprised us almost every week. In America, neighbors smiled warmly, but often returned quickly to their own busy lives. Everyone respected personal space. Appointments mattered. Time mattered. Independence mattered. At first, I admired this way of living. It felt organized and efficient. Later, I realized that efficiency can quietly steal conversations if you're not careful. Our calendars became full while our evenings became empty. Researchers studying family relationships have found that shared routines, even something as small as eating dinner together a few times each week, strengthen emotional security and reduce stress for both parents and children. The reason is surprisingly simple. Human brains feel safer when they experience predictable moments of connection. Looking back, I understand that we were building a successful life, but we were slowly forgetting to build a connected one.
My job was going well.
Promotions came faster than expected. My manager trusted me with bigger projects. Every compliment made me work even harder. I convinced myself that success at work automatically meant success at home. They are not always the same thing. One Friday evening, my son walked into my home office holding a baseball glove. "Dad, can we play outside?" he asked. Without looking away from my laptop, I answered, "Maybe tomorrow." It was an automatic response. So automatic that I barely noticed it. He quietly nodded and walked away. 5 minutes later, I looked out the window. He was throwing the baseball into the air by himself, catching it and throwing it again.
No que en plans. No tears.
Just a little boy learning not to expect too much from his father. That picture stayed in my mind far longer than any business meeting I ever attended. My wife noticed it too, although she said nothing. Silence had become our common language. We still smiled in family photos. We still celebrated birthdays. We still planned vacations. From the outside, everything looked almost perfect. Inside our home, however, something invisible continued to grow. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was distance. Distance rarely arrives with loud footsteps. It quietly sits between two people until one day they realize they have forgotten how to reach across it. At that moment, I still believed I had plenty of time to fix everything. I couldn't have been more wrong, because the next conversation with my wife would leave me speechless and force me to face a truth I had avoided for far too long. Love meets reality. Most relationships do not fall apart because of one terrible day. They slowly run out of ordinary days, filled with kindness. I wish someone had told me that before life became so busy. Looking back now, I can still remember the exact evening when I realized something invisible had changed between my wife and me. We were sitting in the same living room, only a few feet apart, but it felt as if an entire ocean had quietly appeared between us. The television was on, yet neither of us was watching it. My laptop rested on my knees.
Her phone was in her hands.
Two people sharing one room. Two completely different worlds. At first, I blamed work. Then I blamed stress. Later, I blamed the economy. It was much easier than admitting the uncomfortable truth that I had slowly stopped showing up emotionally for the people I loved most. My wife never asked for expensive gifts. She never complained about the size of our house or the car we drove. What she wanted was surprisingly simple. She wanted me to be present. She wanted eye contact. She wanted conversations that lasted longer than a few rushed minutes before bedtime. One Saturday morning, she looked at me while making breakfast and asked, "Do you remember the last time we laughed together?" I smiled awkwardly and tried to answer, but nothing came to my mind. That silence answered her question better than any words ever could. If you're practicing English with me today, repeat this sentence slowly. Being together is not the same as being connected. Once more, being together is not the same as being connected. Keep that sentence in your heart because it changed mine forever. Around the same time, our children began acting differently. My daughter stopped running to the front door when I came home from work. My son no longer asked me to play baseball every weekend. Instead, they learned to entertain themselves. At first, I thought they were simply becoming more independent. In reality, they were quietly adjusting to my absence. Children are incredibly observant. Research in developmental psychology shows that they notice emotional tension long before adults think they do. They may not understand the reasons, but they can feel changes in facial expressions, voice tones, daily routines, and emotional availability. They absorb the atmosphere of a home almost like tiny emotional sponges.
I didn't know any of that then.
I only noticed that dinner conversations became shorter every week. Sometimes we finished an entire meal with almost no meaningful conversation. Forks touched plates. Glasses clinked softly. The clock on the kitchen wall suddenly sounded louder than our voices. Isn't it strange how silence can become the loudest sound inside a family? Then came Valentine's Day. I rushed home carrying beautiful flowers and an expensive necklace I had carefully chosen during my lunch break. I felt proud of myself. I imagined her smiling with surprise. She thanked me politely, placed the flowers in water, hugged me gently, and whispered something I will never forget. "I don't need more gifts. I need more of you." Those 7 words stayed in my mind long after the flowers faded. They were simple English words, yet they carried more truth than every motivational book on my shelf. That evening, instead of arguing, she walked upstairs early, while I remained alone in the kitchen. For the first time in many months, I noticed how quiet our home had become. The refrigerator hummed softly. Snow drifted outside the windows. My coffee slowly turned cold beside me. I realized I couldn't remember the last meaningful conversation we had shared without distractions. Scientists studying long-term marriages often explain that emotional intimacy grows through repeated moments of attention rather than dramatic, romantic events. A 20-second hug, a 5-minute conversation, a shared walk after dinner. Tiny moments repeated consistently change the chemistry of trust inside the brain by reducing stress hormones and increasing feelings of safety. Success at work had taught me to measure everything with numbers.
Salary.
Promotions. Productivity.
Deadlines.
Family worked by completely different rules. Love could not be measured with overtime hours or bank accounts. It was measured in presence, in listening, in patience. Unfortunately, I learned that lesson almost too late. As I closed my laptop that night, I heard my wife quietly crying behind our bedroom door. I stood in the hallway, my hand only inches away from the doorknob, frozen by one terrifying thought. What if the person waiting on the other side had already started imagining a future without me? The day everything changed. It is amazing how one ordinary evening can divide your life into 2 chapters, everything before and everything after. The day that changed my family forever did not begin with a crisis. It began like hundreds of other Tuesdays. I woke up before dawn, grabbed a quick cup of coffee, kissed my wife on the forehead while she was still half asleep, and quietly walked out the front door. I remember thinking about deadlines, meetings, and a presentation that had to be finished before noon. Not once did I think about how my wife looked when she smiled less often these days. Not once did I notice that my children had stopped asking when I would come home. My mind was completely occupied with work because I believed I was building a better future. Ironically, while I was busy building tomorrow, I was slowly destroying today. Around lunchtime, my phone vibrated. It was my wife calling. I almost ignored it because I was sitting in an important meeting. Instead, I sent a quick text. "Can I call you later?" A few seconds passed before she replied with only one word.
Okay.
That single word looked completely normal. No exclamation mark.
No angry emoji.
Nothing unusual. Yet something inside me felt strangely uncomfortable. Looking back now, I realize that the quietest messages often carry the heaviest emotions. If you're learning English with me, repeat this sentence slowly. Never ignore the small moments. Once again, never ignore the small moments. Those 6 words may sound simple, but they might save more relationships than expensive vacations ever could. The meeting finally ended almost 2 hours later. Before I could return her call, my phone rang again. This time it was my neighbor. Her voice sounded nervous. She told me my wife had suddenly left the house in tears after a difficult conversation with our oldest daughter. The children were frightened. She asked if I could come home. My heart immediately began racing. During the drive home, every traffic light felt unbearably long. Every slow-moving car became another obstacle between me and the people I loved. My hands tightened around the steering wheel while hundreds of frightening possibilities filled my mind. Had someone been hurt? Was everyone safe? Had something happened that I could no longer fix? When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same from the outside. The flowers still bloomed beside the front porch. The mailbox stood quietly at the curb. Nothing looked broken. Yet the moment I stepped inside, I felt that something had changed forever. My daughter was sitting on the couch holding her younger brother's hand. Neither of them was speaking. My wife was upstairs. The silence inside the house felt heavier than any shouting I had ever heard. Children rarely know how to explain emotional pain, but they always know when home no longer feels safe. Studies in family psychology show that children naturally watch their parents for emotional security. When communication disappears between parents, children often become anxious, even if no one argues loudly. Their brains constantly search for signs that everything is okay. That afternoon, my children kept looking at me as if they were silently asking a question I didn't know how to answer. Slowly, I walked upstairs and knocked on our bedroom door. After several seconds, my wife quietly said, "Come in." She was sitting near the window, looking out at the gray winter sky. Her eyes were red. She wasn't angry anymore. Somehow, that frightened me even more. Calm sadness often means someone has already cried enough to run out of tears. I sat beside her without saying a word. Finally, she looked at me and whispered something I will carry for the rest of my life. "I don't think we're living together anymore. I think we're just surviving in the same house." Those words felt like someone had knocked the air out of my lungs. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to explain how hard I worked. I wanted to remind her about the mortgage, the bills, the college savings, the long hours, and every sacrifice I believed I had made for our family. But deep inside, I knew none of those answers would change what she was feeling. Facts cannot erase loneliness. Money cannot replace presence. Success cannot hug someone who feels emotionally abandoned. Then she quietly opened a small notebook she had been keeping for months. Inside were dates, little memories, canceled family plans, missed birthdays, broken promises, and short notes she had written whenever she felt alone. I stared at page after page, unable to speak. The evidence wasn't written by anger. It was written by disappointment. And as I reached the final page, I saw one sentence that froze me completely. It simply read, "How much longer should I keep believing that next week will finally be different?" Learning to listen again. Sometimes the hardest conversation of your life begins after all the words have already been spoken. That night, I didn't try to defend myself. I didn't explain my workload. I didn't argue that I was sacrificing everything for my family. For the first time in years, I simply listened. It felt uncomfortable, almost painful. I realized I had spent so many years learning how to solve problems that I had forgotten how to understand feelings. My wife closed the notebook and gently placed it on the bed between us. She wasn't asking me to be perfect. She wasn't asking for a bigger house, a better vacation, or a more expensive lifestyle. She was asking one simple question. Are we still your family? Or are we just another responsibility on your calendar? I wanted to answer immediately. Instead, I stayed silent because I honestly didn't know. That silence became the most honest answer I had given in years. If you're learning English with me today, repeat this sentence slowly. Listening is an act of love. Once more, listening is an act of love. These 6 simple words completely changed the direction of my life. The following morning felt strangely different. I still woke up early, but instead of checking my phone first, I walked quietly into the kitchen. My wife was making coffee. Normally, I would have grabbed my travel mug, kissed her quickly, and rushed out the door. This time, I sat down across from her. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was peaceful. Finally, I looked into her eyes and said something I should have said a long time ago. Tell me everything I haven't been hearing. She looked surprised. Then she smiled sadly and began talking. She talked about lonely evenings. She talked about eating dinner with the children while my chair stayed empty. She talked about school events I had missed because another meeting seemed more important. She talked about feeling like a single parent even though she was married. I listened without interrupting. Every sentence felt heavy, but every sentence also brought us a little closer. Modern neuroscience offers an interesting explanation for moments like these. Researchers have discovered that when people feel deeply heard without being interrupted or judged, the brain reduces the production of stress hormones while increasing chemicals connected to trust and emotional safety. In other words, genuine listening is not just polite behavior. It actually changes how people feel inside their bodies. I wish I had learned that years earlier. Later that afternoon, I did something that seemed incredibly small. I turned off every notification on my phone for 1 hour.
No emails.
No work messages.
No social media.
Just one uninterrupted hour with my family. We sat together in the backyard while the children played catch. The winter air was still cold, but the sunlight felt warmer than it had in months. My son threw me the baseball almost cautiously, as if he wasn't sure I would stay. I caught it, smiled, and threw it back. Then again, and again. After 20 minutes, he laughed louder than I had heard in a very long time. Children rarely ask for perfection. More often, they simply ask for presence. That evening during dinner, I suggested something unusual. Every person at the table would share one good thing about their day and one difficult thing.
No phones.
No television. Just conversation. At first, it felt slightly awkward. My daughter talked about a science project. My son proudly described catching a difficult baseball at practice. My wife admitted she still wasn't sure whether things would truly change. When it was my turn, I surprised even myself. I admitted that I had been afraid for years. Afraid of failing as a provider. Afraid of not earning enough. Afraid that slowing down would somehow disappoint everyone. Instead of making me look weak, honesty seemed to make everyone lean a little closer. Family therapists often explain that vulnerability creates connection because it gives other people permission to stop pretending as well. That simple dinner became the beginning of a brand new tradition. Every evening afterward, we kept talking. Sometimes the conversations lasted 10 minutes. Sometimes an hour. Not every discussion was easy. Some brought tears. Some uncovered old disappointments. Healing rarely happens in a straight line. It moves forward, slips backward, then quietly moves forward again. But little by little, something inside our home began changing. The laughter returned first. Then eye contact. Then spontaneous hugs. Then small jokes during breakfast. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't instant. It was wonderfully ordinary. Looking back now, I understand that love rarely disappears overnight. It simply waits patiently behind neglected conversations, hoping someone will finally stop talking long enough to truly listen. I believed we had finally found the path back to each other. What I didn't know was that the greatest test of our new beginning was still waiting just around the corner. And this time it wouldn't only challenge our marriage, it would reveal whether our family had truly learned how to stand together. Small habits, big changes. Real transformation rarely announces itself with fireworks. More often, it arrives quietly, disguised as tiny decisions that seem too ordinary to matter. A 5-minute conversation before work. A warm hug before bedtime. A walk around the neighborhood after dinner. None of these moments looked powerful by themselves, yet together they slowly rebuilt a family that had nearly fallen apart. I used to believe that if I wanted to save my marriage, I needed one huge romantic gesture. Maybe an expensive vacation. Maybe a beautiful piece of jewelry. Maybe the perfect apology. Instead, I discovered something almost unbelievable. The smallest habits carried the greatest power. Every morning before touching my phone, I asked my wife one simple question. How are you feeling today? Not what do we need to do? Not what's on the schedule? Just one honest question. At first, she answered cautiously, as though she expected me to lose interest after a few days. I couldn't blame her. I had broken many promises before. Trust returns slowly, because the heart remembers disappointment longer than the mind remembers good intentions. If you're practicing English with me today, repeat this sentence slowly. Small habits create big changes. Once more. Small habits create big changes. Keep those words close because they apply to relationships, personal growth, and even learning English. One sentence each day becomes fluent conversation. One kind moment each day becomes lasting love. Researchers studying behavioral psychology often describe something called the compound effect. Tiny positive actions, repeated consistently over time, produce results far greater than dramatic efforts that quickly disappear. The brain loves repetition. New habits strengthen neural pathways little by little, making positive behaviors feel more natural every week. In simple words, your future is often shaped by what you repeat, not by what you promise. That idea changed how I viewed every ordinary day. Instead of searching for perfect moments, I focused on consistent ones. Every evening after work, I left my phone in another room for at least an hour. The first few days felt strangely uncomfortable. I kept wondering if I was missing an important email. Then I realized something surprising. The world continued perfectly well without my immediate replies. Meanwhile, my family noticed something far more important. I was finally looking at them instead of looking through them. My daughter began telling longer stories about school. My son asked me to help him practice baseball again. Even our dog seemed happier because our evening walks became longer. Sometimes the greatest reward for being present is simply noticing everything you had been missing. One Saturday afternoon, my wife suggested we visit a local farmer's market. Months earlier, I probably would have declined because I had too much work. This time, I said yes, without checking my calendar first. We wandered slowly between colorful fruit stands, homemade bread, fresh flowers, and local musicians playing soft country music. The children sampled honey from small wooden sticks, while my wife laughed at something our son had said. Suddenly, I realized I had no memory of the last time I had watched my family without feeling rushed. It was as if someone had quietly returned color to a photograph that had been fading for years. Psychologists often explain that positive shared experiences build what researchers call emotional reserves. These reserves help couples and families survive future stress because happy memories create emotional resilience. Every picnic, every shared meal, every evening walk becomes another small deposit into the emotional bank account of a relationship. The stronger that account becomes, the easier it is to recover after difficult days. Of course, not every day felt easy. Old habits don't disappear overnight. Sometimes I still reached for my phone during dinner without thinking. Sometimes work deadlines tempted me to cancel family plans. The difference was that now someone gently reminded me. Sometimes it was my wife smiling and saying, "We're here." Sometimes it was my son quietly placing the baseball on my desk. Those small reminders no longer felt like criticism. They felt like invitations to return to the life I almost lost. One evening, after we finished dinner, my daughter asked an unexpected question. "Dad, are you happier now?" I looked around the table before answering. There was laughter, warm food, comfortable silence. My wife's hand resting gently on mine. I smiled and said, "I'm not happier because life became easier. I'm happier because I finally learned what deserves my attention." She nodded as though she understood much more than her age suggested. Children often recognize genuine change before adults fully believe it themselves. As winter slowly turned into spring, our home felt lighter. We still faced ordinary problems.
Bills still arrived.
Work remained demanding. The children still argued over silly things. Nothing about life had become perfect. Yet everything felt different because we were facing those challenges together instead of separately. I believed our family was finally healing. Then, one unexpected conversation with my oldest child revealed a truth that would touch my heart more deeply than anything my wife had ever said. Our children noticed first. Adults often believe they are protecting their children by hiding their struggles. The truth is, children usually notice everything long before we think they do. They may not understand mortgages, careers, or emotional burnout, but they understand the feeling of a home. They notice the smiles that disappear. They notice the hugs that become shorter. They notice when laughter slowly leaves the dinner table. Looking back, I realized that while my wife and I were trying to repair our marriage, our children had quietly been watching every small change. They were not waiting for perfect parents. They were waiting for hopeful signs. One warm Saturday morning, several weeks after we had started rebuilding our family, my daughter asked if we could go hiking at a nearby state park. Months earlier, I probably would have answered, maybe next weekend. This time, I closed my laptop without hesitation and said, let's go today. Her eyes widened with surprise. She didn't celebrate. She didn't jump with excitement. She simply smiled as if she wanted to make sure I truly meant it. That tiny reaction broke my heart because it reminded me how many promises had quietly disappeared in the past. If you're learning English with me today, repeat this sentence slowly. Children remember your time more than your gifts. Once again, children remember your time more than your gifts. It is a simple sentence, but perhaps one of the most valuable lessons any parent can learn. During the hike, we walked through tall pine trees while cool mountain air filled our lungs. Birds sang above us, and sunlight slipped gently through the branches. My son raced ahead, pretending he was exploring an unknown forest, while my daughter stayed beside me. After several minutes of comfortable silence, she suddenly asked a question I never expected. Dad, are you staying this time? I stopped walking. At first, I didn't understand what she meant. Then she quietly explained. Sometimes when things get better, they only stay better for a little while. Then work takes you away again. Her words were calm, but they carried years of disappointment hidden behind them. Children often express complicated emotions in remarkably simple language. I knelt beside her and answered honestly. I can't promise life will always be easy, but I can promise that you won't have to compete with my job for my attention anymore. She looked into my eyes for a long moment before wrapping her arms around me. It wasn't a dramatic movie moment. It was quiet,
Real. Human.
Sometimes healing begins with one believable promise instead of 10 impossible ones. Family researchers often explain that children build emotional security through consistency rather than perfection. They don't need parents who never make mistakes. They need parents whose actions become predictable enough to create trust. Every bedtime story, every family dinner, every shared weekend slowly teaches a child's brain one important message. I am safe. I matter. I belong. Those repeated experiences shape confidence for years to come. As spring arrived across our neighborhood, our family created new traditions almost without realizing it. Sunday breakfasts became longer because nobody rushed away afterward. Friday evenings turned into board game nights filled with laughter and playful competition. Even simple grocery shopping became something we did together instead of another task to finish as quickly as possible. Ordinary life suddenly became interesting again because we were finally living it together instead of passing each other like strangers. One evening, while helping my son finish his homework, he paused his pencil and looked at me with complete seriousness. Dad, he said, Mom laughs a lot more now. His words filled the room with silence. He wasn't talking about himself. He wasn't asking for anything. He had simply noticed happiness returning to someone he loved. That realization touched me more deeply than any compliment I had ever received at work. Success had always been measured by promotions, salaries, and professional recognition. Yet the proudest achievement of my life was hearing my little boy notice his mother's laughter again. Neuroscientists often explain that positive emotional experiences inside families become powerful memories because they activate multiple parts of the brain at the same time. Joy connected with love, safety, and belonging creates memories that remain vivid for decades. In many ways, we were giving our children something more valuable than financial security. We were giving them emotional memories they could carry into their own future families one day. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I quietly walked through the house. Toys rested in the living room. Family photos covered the hallway walls. The dishwasher hummed softly in the kitchen. Everything looked wonderfully ordinary. Yet for the first time in years, home no longer felt like a place where people simply slept between busy workdays. It felt alive. I stood by the window, watching the lights of our quiet American neighborhood, believing the hardest part of our journey was finally behind us. Then my wife gently walked beside me, took my hand, and whispered something that made me realize our greatest lesson had never been about saving a marriage at all. It was about discovering what had truly saved our family. What truly saved us? People often ask me one question after hearing the story. What finally saved your family? They expect me to mention marriage counseling, a miracle, a life-changing vacation, or one unforgettable conversation that fixed everything overnight. I always smile because the real answer surprises them. Nothing dramatic saved us. No perfect speech. No magical solution. No single moment erased years of emotional distance. What saved us was something much quieter, something almost invisible. We stopped trying to win arguments and started trying to understand each other. We stopped asking, who's right, and began asking, how are you feeling? That tiny shift changed the atmosphere inside our home more than anything money could ever buy. One evening, while washing the dinner dishes together, my wife looked at me with the same gentle smile that had first made me fall in love with her years earlier. She wasn't smiling because life had suddenly become easy. Bills still arrived every month. Work deadlines still existed. Our children still argued over whose turn it was to clean their rooms. Real life had not become perfect, but something inside us had become stronger than our problems. She quietly said, I finally feel like we're on the same team again. Those words meant more to me than every promotion I had ever received. If you're practicing English with me today, repeat this sentence slowly. Love grows when people feel understood. Once again, love grows when people feel understood. It's an easy sentence to remember, but it carries a lesson that can transform relationships, friendships, and even the way you communicate with yourself. Around that time, I also noticed something unexpected happening inside me. I no longer rushed through every hour of the day. I still worked hard, but I stopped wearing busyness like a badge of honor. For years, I had believed that being constantly exhausted proved I was a good husband and father. In reality, my family never wanted an exhausted version of me. They wanted a present one. That realization felt both painful and incredibly freeing. Psychologists studying emotional well-being often explain that gratitude changes the brain's attention system. Instead of constantly searching for problems, the brain gradually becomes better at noticing positive experiences. This doesn't eliminate difficulties, but it helps people recover from stress more quickly. I decided to test this idea in the simplest way possible. Every night before going to sleep, each member of our family shared one thing they were thankful for that day. Some evenings the answers were meaningful. Other evenings they were wonderfully ordinary. My son was thankful for pizza night. My daughter was thankful for getting an A on a science quiz. My wife was thankful that we had all eaten dinner together without anyone checking their phones. I often found myself saying I was thankful simply because everyone was sitting around the same table. Gratitude slowly became part of our family language. Then something happened that I never expected. One afternoon at work, my manager offered me another opportunity for a major promotion. A year earlier, I would have accepted immediately without asking a single question. This time I asked about the travel schedule, weekend commitments, and expected overtime. The position required long business trips across several states. I thanked him sincerely and asked for a day to think about it. Driving home that evening, I realized I already knew my answer. Success had once meant climbing every ladder placed in front of me. Now success had a different definition. It meant being home for bedtime stories. It meant Saturday breakfasts. It meant hearing my children laugh from the next room. It meant protecting the family I had almost lost. The next morning, I politely declined the promotion. Some coworkers thought I was making a terrible career decision. Perhaps from their perspective I was. But not every valuable choice increases your salary. Some increase your peace. Behavioral scientists often describe this as value-based decision-making. People experience greater long-term happiness when daily choices align with their deepest personal values instead of external expectations. For me, family had finally become more than a word I used to justify working harder. It had become the reason I chose to live differently. Weeks turned into months, and months quietly turned into years. The emotional distance that had once filled our home became almost impossible to recognize. We still disagreed sometimes. We still apologized. We still made mistakes. Healthy families are not built by avoiding conflict. They are built by learning how to return to one another after conflict. One rainy evening, as my wife and I sat on the front porch watching the storm roll across the neighborhood, she gently squeezed my hand and whispered, "We almost lost everything, and somehow losing almost everything helped us discover what truly mattered." I looked toward the warm light shining through our living room window, where our children were laughing together. And I realized our story was no longer about surviving a difficult season. It had become something far more beautiful. It had become proof that even hearts drifting apart can find their way home when love is practiced in small moments every single day. Still, one final chapter remained, and it would reveal the greatest gift our journey had given us, not just as husband and wife, but as a family ready to embrace a happier future together. A happier home today. People sometimes think happy families wake up one morning and suddenly become happy forever. I used to believe that too. Now I know the truth is much simpler and much more beautiful. Happiness is not a destination. It is something you quietly practice every ordinary day. Looking around my home today, I no longer see the family I almost lost. I see a family that learned how to choose one another again and again.
The walls are the same.
The furniture is the same. The neighborhood in America is still peaceful, the seasons still change, and life still brings unexpected challenges. Yet everything feels different because we finally learned that the atmosphere inside a home is created by people, not by possessions. Every morning begins a little more slowly now. Instead of rushing to my phone, I walk into the kitchen where the smell of fresh coffee fills the room. My wife smiles while preparing breakfast, and our children wander downstairs one by one, still sleepy, still laughing about dreams they can barely remember. We don't have perfect conversations every day, but we have real ones. Sometimes they last only 5 minutes before school and work. Sometimes they continue all the way through dinner. Those simple conversations became the heartbeat of our family. If you're learning English with me today, repeat this sentence slowly. Home is where people feel heard. Once again, home is where people feel heard. Keep those words with you, because they describe much more than a house. They describe a feeling every person hopes to find. One spring afternoon, our family decided to plant a small garden in the backyard. None of us were expert gardeners. We argued about where to place the flowers. My son accidentally watered the same plant 3 times. My daughter insisted that tomatoes should grow in a different corner. My wife laughed so hard that she nearly dropped the watering can. Months earlier, I might have become impatient because nothing was happening quickly. This time, I simply enjoyed watching everyone work together. As the weeks passed, tiny green leaves slowly appeared above the soil. My wife smiled and said something that made us all stop for a moment. Families grow the same way gardens do. A little attention every day. She was right. You cannot force flowers to bloom overnight, just as you cannot rebuild trust in a single conversation. Growth happens quietly when care becomes consistent. Psychologists studying family resilience often explain that shared rituals create a powerful sense of belonging. These rituals do not need to be expensive or complicated. A Sunday breakfast, an evening walk, reading together before bed, watching the first snowfall every winter. These repeated experiences become emotional anchors that help families remain connected even during stressful seasons. Looking back, I realized our new traditions were doing exactly that. They were giving us roots strong enough to survive future storms. My children changed too. My son no longer hesitated before asking me to play baseball. He simply grabbed his glove because he expected me to say yes. That small expectation meant everything. My daughter began telling me about her dreams for college, her favorite books, and even the worries she kept hidden from most people. She wasn't opening up because I had suddenly become wiser. She was opening up because I had finally become available. Trust had quietly returned, one conversation at a time. Even my work life found a healthier balance. Surprisingly, my performance did not decline after setting better boundaries. In fact, I became more focused during office hours because my mind was no longer divided between work and guilt. Studies on workplace well-being consistently suggest that people who maintain healthy personal relationships often experience lower stress, better concentration, and greater long-term productivity. I smiled when I read those findings because they described exactly what I had experienced. The more present I became at home, the more peaceful I became everywhere else. One evening, after dinner, we pulled out an old photo album filled with pictures from our first years in the United States. We laughed at our old hairstyles, our tiny first apartment, and the nervous smiles we wore when everything still felt unfamiliar. Then we reached a photograph taken during one of the hardest seasons of our marriage. Looking at it now, no one would have guessed how close we had come to losing each other. The smiles looked real, but behind them lived exhaustion, loneliness, and quiet fear. My wife gently touched the picture before closing the album. "I'm thankful we didn't let this become the end of our story," she whispered. I nodded, unable to find better words. Sometimes the greatest victories leave no trophies behind. They leave stronger families. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the rooftops of our quiet American neighborhood, I realized our journey had never been about becoming perfect people. It had been about becoming present people. And that simple difference changed everything. Still, before our story could truly end, there was one final lesson I wanted to share, one message I hope every person listening today will carry into their own family, their own relationships, and their own future. Hope for every family. Before the story ends, I want you to imagine something. Imagine walking through your front door tonight. The people you love are there, just like they have been countless times before. The question is not whether they are in the house. The question is whether they truly feel that you are there with them. That single thought changed my life forever. I almost lost my family without ever leaving home. I almost watched the people I loved drift away while convincing myself I was doing everything for them. If our story has taught me anything, it is this: the greatest losses rarely happen all at once. They happen one ignored conversation, one postponed dinner, one distracted evening at a time. The beautiful news is that healing works the same way. One sincere apology, one uninterrupted conversation, one shared meal, one hug that lasts a little longer, one promise that is finally kept. Small moments slowly create extraordinary lives. Today, when I wake up in our home here in the United States, I no longer think first about deadlines or meetings. I hear my son laughing downstairs. I hear my daughter singing while getting ready for school. I hear my wife making coffee in the kitchen. Those ordinary sounds have become the richest soundtrack of my life. Years ago, I barely noticed them because my mind was always somewhere else. Now I understand that these quiet moments are the life I was working so hard to build in the first place. If you're learning English with me today, repeat this final sentence slowly. The best time to love is today. Once again, the best time to love is today. It is simple English, easy to remember, but it may become one of the most important sentences you ever learn. Researchers who study happiness often reach a surprisingly consistent conclusion. Long-term happiness depends far less on wealth or status than on the quality of close relationships. Human beings are wired for connection. Our brains become calmer when we feel understood. Our hearts become stronger when we know we belong. Our children become more confident when they grow up surrounded by consistent love and attention. Science explains the process, but families experience it every single day. Looking back, I no longer regret the difficult season we survived. Of course, I wish I had learned these lessons sooner. I wish I had listened more carefully before tears replaced conversations. I wish I had understood that success at work could never replace presence at home. Yet those painful years also taught me something priceless. They reminded me that people can change. Marriages can heal. Families can rebuild trust. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because ordinary people choose ordinary acts of love every single day. Sometimes viewers ask me whether the story has a perfect ending. I always smile because real life rarely offers perfect endings. Instead, it offers meaningful ones. We still disagree occasionally. We still apologize. We still have stressful weeks and unexpected challenges. But now we face them side by side instead of silently drifting apart. We have learned that love is not a feeling you accidentally keep forever. Love is a decision you quietly renew every morning. Before we finish, I want to leave you with one gentle challenge. After this video ends, put your phone down for just a little while. Walk into the room where someone you love is sitting. Ask one honest question. Listen without interrupting. Smile without rushing. Maybe say, "How are you really doing?" You may discover that the conversation you have been postponing is the very conversation that changes everything. And if you are learning English through stories like this one, remember that progress works exactly the same way. One page, one sentence, one new word, one listening session. Day after day, those tiny efforts become confidence. They become fluency. They become a new version of yourself. Never underestimate the power of slow, consistent progress. Whether you are rebuilding a relationship or improving your English, the smallest daily actions often create the greatest transformations. As I stand by the window this evening, watching the sunset paint the sky above our quiet neighborhood, my wife gently takes my hand while our children laugh inside the house. For a long moment, I simply close my eyes and listen. Years ago, I thought success sounded like applause, promotions, and busy schedules. Today, I know success sounds very different. It sounds like laughter echoing through a peaceful home. It sounds like conversations that no longer need to be rushed. It sounds like a family choosing one another again, every single day. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. You do not have to be perfect to protect the people you love. You only have to be present. That is all for today. I will make many more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next one.